Welcome to Breaking Green, a podcast by Global Justice Ecology Project. UNESCO is the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization. It is tasked with the promotion of global peace and security through international cooperation in education, science, culture, and information. Yet, recent reporting by Survival International has highlighted how UNESCO has used its influence to support the forced relocation of the Maasai from their land in Tanzania. The Maasai, who are an indigenous people of the Serengeti, are again being brutally repressed and their herding culture intentionally dismantled in favor of a fortress conservation model that promotes trophy hunting and tourism over the rights of the Maasai who have lived on the land from time immemorial. On this episode of Breaking Green, we will speak with Paul Renaut. Paul Renaut is a researcher with Survival International, where he has worked extensively since 2019 on the campaign to decolonize conservation in Africa. Paul's efforts have included working extensively in the field with the Maasai. He currently joins us from Paris. Paul Renaut, welcome to Breaking Green.
Thank you.
So, Paul, tell us a little bit about Survival International. It's been a while since we've done an interview with your organization.
Yes, of course. So Survival is a human rights NGO campaigning on the rights of indigenous peoples. So we do various campaigns on various topics around the world. And today I will speak more precisely on our campaign to decolonize conservation, which is fighting against human rights violations that are committed in the name of nature protection, but most accurately that are following a colonial system that leads to the systemic eviction of indigenous peoples from their lands and of a lot of violence.
Yes, colonial conservation. So I think having interviewed Fiora Longo before, a lot of that has to do with the idea that what a lot of people would associate with the conservation movement, that there's this idea that there's these pristine lands that exist or should exist without people. But people have always been part of the land. So what we see with conservation is moving rightful landowners, caretakers, indigenous people off that land with the idea that we're going to have a natural state. So could you address, what's wrong with that picture?
Yeah, as you were saying, the whole premise is to say that indigenous peoples or local communities are destroying the land that they live on, and that in order to protect nature, but this abstract idea of nature that would be empty of people, we would have to evict them. But the truth is that these spaces that we consider, or that the West considers as the most wild places on Earth, or even the most biodiverse, are actually the lands of indigenous peoples. And if they are in such good shape, it's because they have not only lived in them, but also protected them and shaped them. So that's why from a conservation point of view, it makes no sense to evict the best guardians of these spaces. It's just a model that is based on, again, colonial history, and increasingly, the goal is to include these spaces in the capitalist system and try to make profit from them. So once the original inhabitants are evicted, then there is room for all kinds of exploitation, whether it be extractive industries or tourism, or that kind of thing.
The treatment of the indigenous people is quite brutal. And I think people would be surprised to learn that some of these wildlife or conservation organizations that everyone thinks of as, or many people think of as preserving nature, working for good, actually can support or even be part of brutal repression.
Yeah, it's actually very concrete when we say that these people are evicted or framed as a threat to the environment. Actually, what it means for the people who live in these spaces and who face this is brutality. So the rangers that are supposed to guard or these spaces, these wild spaces, are not only evicting them, but also doing so very violently. And we have documented over years countless acts of torture, of beatings, of rape, of indigenous peoples when they try to go back to their lands or during the creation or management of these protected areas. And these protected areas are often supported or managed or co-managed by Western conservation organizations, including some of them very famous like WWF, WCS, African Parks. And these organizations not only adhere and have promoted this model of empty nature and the fact that local communities and indigenous peoples are a threat to their environment, and they have been doing so again for decades and since colonial times. But very concretely, they are supporting and funding the very rangers that commit the violence.
The reason why we have you on the program today is we saw several press releases regarding the Maasai people in Tanzania and UNESCO and Evictions. So let's start with the Maasai people. What can you tell us about the Maasai people?
So I think the situation that the Maasai have faced is very emblematic of what we have been saying so far about conservation, its colonial roots, and its concrete impact today. So the Maasai are pastoralist indigenous people that lives in Tanzania and Kenya. And since colonial times, they have been facing eviction from their lands to make way for protected areas. So in the case of Tanzania, the Maasai were evicted to make way for the Serengeti National Park by the British colonial administration in 1959. And from then on, everywhere they went and all over Maasai land, they have faced and are still facing evictions to make way for conservation, but that also goes with hand in hand with tourism and trophy hunting, for example. So yeah, basically all Maasai land is now under threat. So or has already been grabbed for conservation related purposes. But again, not with a very accurate sense of protecting nature. It all goes back to that model that evicts people, but to better profit from the land.
So the Maasai are the indigenous people of the Serengeti.
Yes, that's correct. So it's the Serengeti is their own land, but they have been evicted from it, and so they now live in other parts of their territory. And even they are still facing evictions.
So what does UNESCO have to do with the current status of the Maasai?
So UNESCO itself has, since its creation, been instrumental in promoting that model of fortress conservation that is negatively affecting so many indigenous peoples. And more specifically, linked to World Heritage sites. So, in the case of the Maasai, for example, the Ngorongoro Conservation Area is a World Heritage site. And there is a direct link between that status and the current threats that they face. So basically, UNESCO has been complicit in the Tanzanian government long-standing persecution of the Maasai in the area.
We've seen Survival International press releases regarding the Maasai protest in Tanzania. They're protesting UNESCO's complicity in their eviction for so-called conservation. And they're also talking about how a commission has recently released a report saying that they do need to be removed because their activity in the so-called protected areas are degrading, are somehow negatively impacting the land. So the Maasai are historically herders. They are sheep herders. What does the eviction of the Maasai look like? I've read reports of cattle being taken, actually very brutal things. So could you tell us a little bit what the eviction actually looks like on the ground?
Yes, so it takes various forms in the various areas of Maasai land. Some of you may remember shocking images from 2022, where the Maasai were violently evicted from a neighboring area to the Serengeti called Loliondo. And they were protesting this eviction, and that was met with extreme violence from security forces and government forces who shot live bullets at them. So you can actually see videos that the Maasai have taken documenting this eviction of them fleeing just these bullets flying by them. And this land has now been turned into a game reserve, mostly for the benefit of the Dubai royal family, and for trophy hunting, basically. So that's one example. And another one that is in the area that is inscribed on the World Heritage List, the NCA, Ngorongoro Conservation Area. In that area, it's the evictions are a bit more subtle. And actually, they are framed by the Tanzanian government as voluntary relocation. But as you will see, this has nothing voluntary, because in this area, basically, the government is trying to suffocate the Maasai to force them to leave. So it's characterized by arbitrary arrests, some cases of torture and beatings, as you said, unlawful confiscation of their cattle. And a key aspect is also the deliberate suspension of social services that are vital for the Maasai to be able to continue to live there. So that includes healthcare, access to medicine, for example, funding from hospitals, access to drinking water, and also access to education. And there is a whole narrative pushed by the Tanzanian government around NCA that really frames Maasai pastoralism as an environmental threat. And what's interesting is that the Tanzanian government has also been using UNESCO as a justification for this, and using UNESCO's recommendations, because the World Heritage Committee, when it assesses all the sites that are inscribed on its list, also makes recommendations. And in the case of the NCA, UNESCO recommended to Tanzania to be careful of the population pressure in the area, to make sure that the population remained within, and I quote, the capacity of the reserve. And it said that not doing so would jeopardize the area's status as a UNESCO World Heritage. So basically, UNESCO has been providing the legitimacy and the arguments to the Tanzanian government to justify the evictions, and including in its most recent recommendations. So the Tanzanian government continues to, frame the Maasai as destroying the environment, and to frame their evictions as voluntary relocation. And it's a vocabulary that has been taken also or reused by UNESCO. So it really all goes hand in hand, and that's what Survival has been trying to point to, and what the Maasai also have protested against.
That's interesting. UNESCO, I believe, stands for United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. They're ignoring the culture of the Maasai, it sounds like, in favor of trophy hunting. How long have the Maasai historically been in that region?
Yeah, so the Maasai have been here for generations, since time immemorial, basically. And it's true what you say, that it's counterintuitive to see UNESCO pushing that narrative of, nature that is threatened by its people. But it's very characteristic of the concept of natural world heritage. this idea that these areas have a natural outstanding value for all humanity. So basically, once this value is put under the care or the trusteeship of all humanity, then the people who actually live there and who, under international law, have land rights over these areas are disregarded. So yes, it's counterintuitive, but very characteristic, and it's something that we have also documented in many other protected areas all across Africa and Asia of UNESCO World Heritage sites that where the status has been given to areas with shocking levels of violence and evictions of indigenous peoples in the name of conservation.
This is your host, Steve Taylor, and we will be back right after this.
If you're enjoying this episode of Breaking Green, please subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts. The interviews heard here are often ignored by mainstream media, and without your support, these stories would not be covered. Consider leaving a review and sharing it with friends and colleagues. You can find the full catalog of previous episodes and sign up to have future episodes delivered straight to your inbox at breakinggreen.org.
You can't find freedom anywhere else.
Welcome back to Breaking Green. Are the Maasai themselves concerned about the level of herding? Are they doing anything about this? I think I read that the Maasai, who are indigenous, and it's really they claim and you know, they're the indigenous people. They have the right to be there. Are they concerned with herding pressures? Are they doing anything to mitigate any herding pressures at all?
Yeah, I think that's very ingrained in the Maasai way of life, to just care for the environment, make sure that it's also sustainable for the future generations. And that's the case for all indigenous peoples, basically, because they depend so closely on the land, and it's in their interest and in the interest of future generations to take care of it as best as possible. And there are a lot of rules and practices that are meant to make sure that the land remains in good conditions for future generations and for themselves, and framing their practices as destroying the environment or being uncontrolled or being a pressure actually also disregards this level of knowledge and expertise that the Maasai have in managing their own land. So and all scientific evidence points towards the value of pastoralism in, again, not only protecting, but also shaping these areas. They would look completely different without pastoralism and wouldn't be as biodiverse or in as good shape. And again, as you were saying, they also have the right to be there regardless. So it's not as if their rights were conditioned on them being good environmentalists. But the fact is, and the scientific truth is, that they are.
We've reported before that studies have shown that a vast majority, a vast proportion of biodiversity is on indigenous lands. And it seems like there's this tendency for industrialized nations, which are less biodiverse and causing the global warming problems, to sort of dictate that these indigenous cultures now need to do this or that to be better stewards, when they're doing a much better job than industrialized nations.
Yes, that's true. I mean, industrialized nations are trying to compensate the fact that they destroy, or their activities are destroying the environment, and trying to compensate that on the other side of the world by forcing other people to change, again, without really scientific evidence. And we also see that in a even more disconnected way with carbon credits, for example. So now it's the case with biodiversity, but in the case of carbon, the nations that are most that have the highest level of greenhouse gases emissions are hoping or trying or pretending to compensate them by again funding projects or buying credits from projects that also destroy indigenous people's lands, and most often in the global south. So yeah, it's a dynamic that we really see in the whole environment sector.
So the Maasai are struggling for their land rights, their culture, their way of life. Were there not guarantees given to the Maasai to be able to live in certain regions when they gave up portions of the Serengeti in the 50s? So weren't there guarantees given that are now being ignored or not honored?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, for example, the Ngorongoro conservation area that we just mentioned was, when it was designed as a place for what they call the multiple land use. So both for biodiversity protection and with the Maasai having the right to live there. And when they were forced out of the Serengeti, they were promised that in the NCA and other areas, they would never be bothered again. So actually, we talked a lot with Maasai elders in the area who remember when they were a kid being evicted from the Serengeti and promised that they would never be bothered again in the NCA and elsewhere. And now these same people that are now, again, elders, are facing what their parents and themselves when they were kids faced. So that's quite, a broken promise and also heartbreaking for the people that live there.
So what does the struggle look like? What have the Maasai been able to accomplish? What are they trying to accomplish? Are they finding allies other than Survival International?
Yeah, I think the Maasai are really developing a very strong resistance movement. They have lawyers and their own organizations supporting the fight. They also are doing a lot of community organizing. So there have been massive protests against these evictions. For example, a few years ago, over 30,000 Maasai blocked the road between the NCA and the Serengeti. That is the most used by tourists who go from one protected area to another. So that's really here, putting pressure on the government and the whole industry where it hurts, basically, with the revenue from tourism. So they have been using really all the tools available locally and nationally and internationally to make their voices heard and to resist these evictions. Some leaders also travel to Europe and to the US to speak with the very institutions that are funding projects that evict them, that are designing the policies that are used as arguments for the Tanzanian government. So yes, they are actively resisting, and it's not the end.
What kind of abuses are the Maasai suffering with this?
Yes, it's for example, the protest I mentioned in 2022 in Loliondo has led to an extremely violent repression by security forces, firing live bullets at the Maasai. And now this land that they were trying to keep has been turned into a game reserve, and the people have lost most of their grazing land, so a lot of their cattle as well. And that has basically had a devastating impact for the whole community. People have had to flee. Some are still injured, and that really destroyed the balance within the community of food security and similar issues.
If their land rights ultimately are not recognized, what happens to the Maasai? What does that look like for them culturally? Where are they to live? What is there thought given to where the Maasai live? Are they to lose their culture completely?
Well, as we said, the Maasai are pastoralists, so they depend on their land and on being able to graze their cattle on their land to be able to live. It's the whole basis of their way of life. So not only of their livelihood, so being able to eat meat or to drink milk. It also touches to the very core of their identity, because it's also cows are really central to their identity for all aspects of life. So losing the land means losing the cattle and losing that existential link with their cattle. So in a way, yes, you're right. Their identity as an indigenous people, and that also has some spiritual and cultural impacts that can't be fixed once they lose the land. So, for example, in the case of Loliondo, we talked a lot with the communities who are now unable to go into the protected area that was created, and they say that they lost access to spiritual sites, and the fact that they aren't able to graze their cattle and lost a lot of cattle also means that some important cultural rituals can't be performed. So, for example, when a woman gives birth, she is supposed to eat or drink blood, or basically rituals that are based on slaughtering the cattle. And now being unable to do that is really weakening the women who just give birth, and just detrimental to the whole community. So yes, it's not only a matter of livelihood and food security, even though that's a very core issue as well, but it really impacts the core of their identity and their whole way of life.
So again, this speaks to culture, and you would think that UNESCO, which is a cultural organization, would give more heed, more attention to the Maasai's cultural rights and needs. But here we are. We've mentioned the Tanzanian government. We've mentioned UNESCO. Are there any other players in this organizationally that are behind removing the Maasai?
I think it can also be interesting to mention the role of conservation organizations, especially in the case of the Maasai, the Frankfurt Zoological Society, who's based in Germany and has for decades, again, pushed that narrative of the Maasai being a threat to the environment. And it started with one of its first directors, Bernard Grzimek, who was a member of the Nazi Party and really was instrumental in the creation of the Serengeti National Park, and has always framed the Maasai as destroying the land, and it's been described. The Frankfurt Zoological Society has been described by the Maasai as their enemy number one, providing the narrative and support to the government for these evictions. And an aspect of UNESCO that maybe we didn't mention too much is this. The international prestige and support and publicity that it brings, and in turn, that's very key for tourism and the revenues from tourism. And again, that prestige is quite precious for the Tanzanian government, and the fact that UNESCO is instead of using this weight to oppose evictions and change the narrative that for so long it has pushed, is continuing to refer to the evictions as voluntary relocations and keeps going with the same narrative. So yes, a lot of Western actors still involved.
Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you would like to discuss?
No, I think we said quite a lot.
Well, Paul Renaut, thank you for joining us on Breaking Green.
Thank you so much.
You have been listening to Breaking Green, a Global Justice Ecology Project podcast. To learn more about Global Justice Ecology Project, visit globaljusticeecology.org. Breaking Green is made possible by tax-deductible donations by people like you. Please help us lift up the voices of those working to protect forests, defend human rights, and expose false solutions. Simply text GIVE, G-I-V-E, to 1-716-257-4187. That's 1-716-257-4187.